Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new legal breaking reporting video analysis update for the evening hours of 9 o'clock in the evening for Sunday, January 18, 2026. Let's get into this reporting by the by the Washington Post. Read by an automated voice, ladies and gentlemen, so we will be taking a look at it as well as a listen. Let's get into it.
You're listening to FBI Open Probe on Minneapolis shooting. None exists now, Justice Depp says. A news story written by Perry Stein and read by Josh, an AI-generated voice. In the immediate aftermath of the death of Renee Good in Minneapolis, FBI agents launched a civil rights investigation into the actions of the immigration officer who shot her, according to 3 people familiar with the investigation.
Which is odd, ladies and gentlemen, because they can never keep their story straight. It's always changing. Because from earlier reporting that I did, Deputy wannabe Attorney General Todd Blanche had said that there's no basis for a criminal civil investigation into Jonathan Ross, into the shooting of Nicole Renee Macklin Good. There's only basis for her wife, Rebecca Good, as well as Minneapolis Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, which is completely ridiculous, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get it back into this reporting.
An agent in Minnesota conducted an initial review of the shooting and determined that sufficient grounds existed to open a civil rights probe into the actions of Jonathan Ross, the officer who shot Good, according to the people, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. The existence of the civil rights investigation stands in sharp contrast to public statements made by Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, who said on Fox News Sunday that the shooting of Good does not warrant a federal investigation. There are over 1,000 shootings every year where law enforcement are put in danger by individuals, and they have to protect themselves, and they have a lawful right to do so, Blanche said. The Department of Justice doesn't just stand up and investigate because some congressman thinks we should, because some governor thinks that we should. We investigate when it's appropriate to investigate, Blanche added. And that is not the case here. It was not the case when it happened, and is not the case today. Instead of a civil rights investigation, Justice Department leaders have tried to pursue a probe against Good's partner, multiple people familiar with the probe said. Legal experts said that there is a low threshold for the FBI to open a civil rights investigation, and that prosecutors and FBI agents occasionally disagree about when criminal investigations should be pursued. The FBI declined to comment about the decisions regarding the investigation. Any federal use of force investigation into an officer's conduct is considered a civil rights investigation because the provision under which officers can be charged is a civil rights statute that covers deprivation of a person's rights under color of law. On January 7th, an immigration and customs enforcement officer in Minneapolis shot 3 times into the car of Good, a 37-year-old American citizen. Good's partner was protesting ICE officers.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, it was actually 4 times because I've received reporting before that that I did earlier today, and the analysis, which was reported by many, including 30-year former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner, that there was a 4th bullet that was in the side of Renee Macklin Good. Without that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get back into it.
Officers nearby in the moments before the shooting. About a dozen senior prosecutors in Washington and Minnesota have said they would be leaving their jobs amid turmoil over the Trump administration's handling of Good's shooting death. At least 5 prosecutors in Minnesota, including the office's second-in-command, were furious that Justice Department leaders demanded that they investigate Good's partner, prompting them to resign, according to people familiar with their decision, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss personnel matters. In Washington, multiple senior prosecutors in the criminal section of the Civil Rights Division left, in part, because they were excluded from the Good investigation. People familiar with their departure said that, before the shooting, many of them had already planned to take early retirement because they believed that Justice Department leaders were undermining their work. The handling of the Minneapolis shooting, the people said, hastened their departures. No responsible prosecutor should determine what an outcome should be in such a case until such an investigation is completed, said W. Anders Folk, who served as acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota during the Biden administration. I am concerned that without a thorough, impartial, and transparent investigation, the public's confidence in law enforcement, prosecutors, and public safety professionals will suffer. A robust federal investigation could determine that the officer was justified in shooting Good, legal experts noted. Law enforcement officers are rarely charged for using lethal force, in part because the law provides significant leeway for officers to decide when use of force is needed. An accurate conclusion can only be reached, however, if law enforcement officials examine all relevant state and federal laws, and their application to the facts in the case, the legal experts said. A thorough investigation, for example, might conclude that the officer's first shot at Good was justified, but that the next two were not. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Democrat, and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey.
Which, that is, obviously, as we all know, going to be that the last 2 to 3 shots were not justified, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get back into it.
Democrat, have said that state officials have been blocked from conducting an investigation into the shooting, with the FBI taking over the probe and denying state agencies access to evidence. Justice Department and FBI leaders have not publicly explained what their probe entails, only saying that a civil rights investigation is not warranted. The Justice Department has since launched a federal investigation into Walz and Frey, examining whether the two Democratic leaders are impeding federal law enforcement officers' abilities to do their jobs in the state, the Washington Post reported Friday. Federal prosecutors are expected to serve the two leaders with subpoenas in the coming days. Walz and Frey have denied any wrongdoing and have accused the Trump administration of weaponizing law enforcement for political purposes.
Good journalism is even better when it's shared. With a premium subscription to the Washington Post, you get 3 extra accounts to share with friends and family, so they can stay informed too. Right now, you can get a premium subscription to the Post for $6 every 4 weeks. Just $6 unlocks trusted reporting to share with other people in your life. After your first 6 months, it'll cost $19 every 4 weeks. You can cancel anytime. Head over to WashingtonPost.com/subscribe and get premium access to the Washington Post today. That's WashingtonPost.com/subscribe.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for that second reporting video analysis update. Let's get into our second one by The Hill, read by an automated voice. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, please like, comment, share, subscribe, as well as enjoy for more legal breaking news on the side of politics that you need to know about and more. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it.
Van Hollen. ICE agents are the ones breaking the law, not the peaceful protesters. By Tara Suter. Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, criticized Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE on Sunday, saying it needs dramatic reform after recent turmoil surrounding the agency. ICE agents are the ones breaking the law, not the peaceful protesters. So, I believe we should not be funding an ICE operation that is completely lawless. It needs dramatic reform. You know, Donald Trump said he was going to go after the, quote, worst of the worst. Van Hollen told ABC News' Jonathan Karl. If you look at their own data, 80% of the people they are apprehending around the country posed no public threat whatsoever. The Maryland senator added, instead of addressing that problem, they pulled down the data so we can no longer see it. The recent fatal shooting of a woman in Minneapolis by an ICE officer has further inflamed tensions surrounding the Trump administration's immigration agenda, which have been present throughout President Trump's second term. Trump on Thursday warned of using the Insurrection Act following demonstrations in Minneapolis, but said a day later there was no reason to invoke the law immediately. I do not think there is any reason right now to use it, but if I needed it, I would use it, Trump told reporters. On Sunday, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem confirmed her agency is working on an internal review of the actions of the ICE officer that killed Renee Good. Senator Ruben Gallego-Diarez also said Sunday that he believes ICE needs to be totally torn down. It has to be created in the image of what people want, right? And what does that look like? Gallego told CNN's Jake Tapper. From my experience running in Arizona, in a very hard state when it comes to immigration and immigration issues, people want immigration enforcement that goes after criminals, right, and focuses on criminals, and immigration enforcement that is actually focused on security, and not the goon squad that has come from Stephen Miller and Donald Trump. The Hill has reached out to ICE for comment.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into our next reporting by the New York Times, read by an automated voice, ladies and gentlemen. So we will be taking a look as well as a read and a listen. Let's get into it.
$1 billion in cash buys a permanent seat on Trump's Board of Peace. This article is by Isabel Kirshner and read by an automated voice. President Trump's Board of Peace is billing itself as a new international peacekeeping body, and permanent membership won't come cheap. Mr. Trump is inviting countries to join beyond a 3-year term if they're willing to cough up more than $1 billion in cash within the board's first year, according to a draft of the board's charter reviewed by the New York Times. And while the board was conceived as part of Mr. Trump's plan to oversee Gaza, there is no mention of Gaza in the charter. That omission added to speculation that the group may have a broader mandate to cover other conflicts and could even be aimed at creating a U.S.-dominated alternative to the United Nations Security Council. A Security Council resolution, adopted in November 2025, endorsed Mr. Trump's plan for ending the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza, and welcomed the establishment of the board as a transitional administration that would set the framework and coordinate funding for Gaza's redevelopment. The enclave was devastated during the 2 years of war. About 80% of the buildings in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed, according to the United Nations. Many of the roughly 2 million residents are still living in tents among millions of tons of rubble. The board's charter was sent out with invitations to potential members over the weekend. A copy reviewed by The Times was verified by an official on the condition of anonymity because of the delicate diplomacy. News of the $1 billion buy-in was previously reported by Bloomberg. On Friday, the White House announced the board's members would include Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Jared Kushner, Mr. Trump's son-in-law, and Ajay Banga, the head of the World Bank. Several countries said they had received invitations to join, including Argentina, Canada, Egypt, and Turkey. King Abdullah II of Jordan has also been invited, the Jordanian Foreign Ministry announced on Sunday. Mr. Trump, who is to chair the board, said in a post on Truth Social last week that it will be the greatest and most prestigious board ever assembled at any time, any place, though much about it remained unclear. The charter appears to outline a much more ambitious role for the board than the one described in Mr. Trump's plan for Gaza, published in October 2025, as well as the subsequent Security Council resolution. The board's mission, according to the charter, is to seek to promote stability, restore dependable and lawful governance, and secure enduring peace in areas affected or threatened by conflict, and to undertake peace-building functions in accordance with international law. The preamble emphasizes the need for what it calls a more nimble and effective international peace-building body, and laments that too many approaches to peace-building foster perpetual dependency and institutionalize crisis rather than leading people beyond it. According to the charter, the board is expected to meet for voting at least annually, and expenses are to be funded through voluntary contributions from member states or other sources. The charter does not elaborate on the peacekeeping efforts. Along with the Board of Peace, the White House on Friday also outlined a Gaza Executive Board that would help liaise with a committee of Palestinian technocrats appointed to administer daily life in Gaza. The Gaza Executive Board includes Ali Al-Thawadi, a senior Qatari official, and Hakan Fidan, the Turkish foreign minister, among others. The composition of the executive board prompted the office of Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to issue a rare public protest against the Trump administration, saying it was not coordinated with Israel and runs contrary to its policy. While an Israeli businessman is on the executive board, Israeli government officials have not been named to it. Miri Regev, an Israeli minister from Mr. Netanyahu's conservative Likud party, told Israel's public broadcaster, Khan, on Saturday that Israel objected to participation of Qatar and Turkey, adding, Prime Minister Netanyahu will do everything to change that decision. Relations between Israel and Turkey have oscillated over the decades, but since the war in Gaza, set off by Hamas's attack against Israel in October 2023, they have deteriorated. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey has downgraded ties with Israel, repeatedly compared Mr. Netanyahu to Adolf Hitler, and praised Hamas while hosting its officials. Israeli officials are anxious about the prospect of Turkey gaining influence over Gaza's future. After Israel struck Qatar in September 2025 in a failed attempt to kill Hamas leaders meeting there, Mr. Netanyahu defended the action and lashed out against the country for giving what he called safe haven to the militant group, even as Qatar was trying to negotiate a ceasefire. Qatari officials have said they hosted Hamas officials at the request of the U.S. government to facilitate channels of communication. Mr. Netanyahu has in the past relied on Qatar to send millions of dollars a month to Gaza, a policy that was intended to keep the peace, but that also helped prop up Hamas's rule over the territory. Israel's priority is seeing Gaza demilitarized. Hamas so far has not agreed to lay down its arms. Gabby Sobelman contributed, reporting from Rehovot, Israel.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into our next reporting by the New York Times as well, read by an automated voice, so we will be taking a look, a read, as well as a listen, ladies and gentlemen. Without further ado, before we begin, if you did enjoy this legal breaking reporting thus far and have enjoyed the reporting thus far, please like, comment, share, subscribe, as well as enjoy for more legal breaking news on the side of politics and more that you need to know about. Let's get into it without further ado.
In Spain's Little Caracas, Venezuelan exiles are still waiting. This article is by Jason Horowitz and Jose Bautista and read by an automated voice. As the deposed Venezuelan autocrat Nicolas Maduro lingers in a Brooklyn prison, the mild-mannered former ambassador, who overwhelmingly beat him in the country's 2024 presidential election, is struggling to steer his homeland's future from a modest apartment in Madrid. In a simple headquarters kept spotless by his wife and sparsely decorated with a Virgin Mary statuette, the politician Edmundo Gonzalez, 76, is addressed as Presidente as he works on prisoner releases, speaks with dignitaries, and drafts a platform for what seems likely to be a long shadow government, according to fellow exiles who have met with him. Mr. Gonzalez, who went into exile after Mr. Maduro and his oppressive military apparatus refused to accept defeat, is perhaps the leading figure of Spain's Venezuelan diaspora. With roughly 700,000 members, it is the largest Venezuelan community outside the Americas, wielding outsized influence and standing to gain big from Mr. Maduro's capture. In addition to a president-elect and a first lady in waiting, it includes a dashing opposition leader, a former mayor of Caracas, and myriad politicians, generals, and mysterious businessmen, some enriched with oil, others corruption, who have bought up so much of Madrid's exclusive Salamanca neighborhood that some parts have become known as Little Caracas. Madrid is the center where the leaders with the highest political responsibilities are based, said Ismael Garcia, a prominent member of the Venezuelan opposition who works with Mr. Gonzalez in Spain. It is where, he said, the most important issues are discussed. The overarching issue for Spain's Venezuelan exiles is the whiplash induced by the United States' removal of Mr. Maduro, only to stick with his deputy. Many in the Madrid diaspora, especially conservatives who took up the Trumpian "Make Venezuela Great Again" motto, had campaigned for American military intervention. They fantasized about a swift return home to see their families, run for office, or replenish their fortunes in vast petroleum fields. They celebrated the January 3rd abduction of Mr. Maduro by American Special Forces and expected it to prompt the installation of Mr. Gonzalez or Maria Corina Machado, the opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner who propped up his candidacy. But despite Mr. Gonzalez's staking his claim to the presidency and saying in a video that Mr. Maduro's removal was not enough, the president-elect remains in Madrid. President Trump has, some exiles complain, pulled the rug out from under the long-suffering opposition by sticking with Mr. Maduro's hardline vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, as the regime figure better positioned to deliver the oil and change that Mr. Trump has demanded. Their champagne might grow stale, said Boris Izaguirre, a Venezuelan writer and showman who hosted Miss Venezuela competitions and who has become one of Spain's leading television personalities. He spoke in the tea room of the Wellington Hotel, which he called the town hall of the diaspora's power players, who he said had dollar signs in their eyes when they talked of returning to help Venezuela. "I don't think these are happy days for them," he said. Mr. Izaguirre then left for a dinner, where, he said later, some of the city's leading right-wing Venezuelans debated the need to adapt to the new, less ideologically pure reality in which Mr. Maduro's allies remained in charge despite his capture. It reminded Mr. Izaguirre of a quote attributed to a saint by Truman Capote: "More tears are shed over answered prayers than unanswered ones." An analysis passed around the diaspora's group chats argued that there needed to be a gradual transition in the regime, which still had control of the military and intelligence services, before Ms. Machado or Mr. Gonzalez could safely return. Carlos Tablante, a Venezuelan former minister now based in Madrid, said it was unrealistic for the exiled opposition to rush back to a country still run by officials who could fling them in jail. "It's more useful to have an elected president in Madrid than in prison in Caracas," said Mr. Tablante, who last saw Mr. Gonzalez in a New Year's Eve video phone greeting from across town. Still, others worry about losing momentum, and that Mr. Gonzalez and his ilk may be forced to become permanent Madrid residents. Venezuela and Spain have long and tight ties. Many Spaniards fled to Venezuela during the dictatorship of Francisco Franco, when Hugo Chavez took power in Caracas, establishing a socialist-influenced ruling model, nationalizing major industries, and pushing out Spanish oil and banking interests. Many wealthy Venezuelans began seeking sanctuary in Spain. That exodus only increased under Mr. Maduro, who succeeded Mr. Chavez in 2013, and included Chavez associates looking to park their cash. In the meantime, Venezuela became an ideological dividing line in Spain's domestic politics, with Spanish conservatives aligning with exiles to try to paint their left-leaning Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, as Maduro light. Many Venezuelans around Madrid found the comparison far-fetched, especially because Mr. Sanchez, who has tried to position himself as a bridge between Mr. Gonzalez and Ms. Rodriguez, has provided sanctuary to many of the exiles. In November, Mr. Gonzalez was especially concerned that a rising anti-migrant sentiment among his allies in Spanish conservative parties could hurt the country's large Venezuelan diaspora, according to Mr. Tablante, the former minister, who has met with the president-elect. Mr. Gonzalez declined to speak to the New York Times. He has been told by Ms. Machado to lie low, exiles say, as she desperately seeks to get on the good side of Mr. Trump, including by giving him her Nobel Peace Prize on Thursday at a meeting at the White House. "In these strange weeks, Madrid has become a mix of parties and fear," said Johanna von Muller-Klingspoor, a restaurateur who is active in Madrid society and a foundation supporting Venezuelan exiles. Her Salamanca neighborhood restaurant is, she said, the embassy where the well-heeled and politically powerful exiles, including, she said, Mr. Gonzalez, come to eat tequeños, fried dough stuffed with cheese under taxidermic ibex heads. Ms. von Muller-Klingspoor, 50, said she has admired Ms. Machado since they got to know each other in her 20s in Caracas, but she said that a transition to democracy needed to take place before Ms. Machado or Mr. Gonzalez could take their rightful place. Madrid is not short on options for potential Venezuelan leaders. Its handsome Salamanca streets are also home to Leopoldo Lopez, the wealthy and Harvard-trained pro-democracy activist who led opposition protests to Mr. Maduro in 2014. Mr. Lopez suffered years of imprisonment and house arrest and fled to Spain in 2020. Mr. Lopez's father, another prominent exile, has become a member of the European Parliament with Spain's Conservative People's Party. Madrid's Venezuelan diaspora extends well beyond the leading political and business figures. In the busy Maravillas market, lined with Venezuelan food stalls, Alessandro Di Stasio, a Venezuelan investigative journalist, said he had welcomed the news of Mr. Maduro's removal, but remained careful about what he published under his name. "I will return when democracy is guaranteed," he said. All of these exiled voices, said Maria Costanza Cipriani, whose imprisoned husband was Ms. Machado's lawyer, helped call for a Venezuela that would eventually respect the 2024 election results. "They are the voice of Venezuela outside Venezuela," she said. "They amplify our voice."
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I call on the Venezuelan interim government to come after Donald Trump and capture him now that he and the U.S. Special Forces illegally abducted Nicolas Maduro Moros. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into our next reporting by the New York Times. Before we begin, ladies and gentlemen, please like, comment, share, subscribe, as well as enjoy for more legal breaking news that you need to know about and more. Need to know about and more on the side of politics.
Gnome denies use of chemical agents in Minnesota, then backtracks. This article is by Minho Kim and read by an automated voice. Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, denied in a televised interview on Sunday that her department had used pepper spray and similar tactics curtailed by a judicial order issued last week, then backtracked and blamed protesters after being confronted with a video of federal agents deploying such measures against crowds in Minnesota. That federal order was a little ridiculous because that federal judge came down and told us we couldn't do what we already aren't doing, Ms. Noem said on CBS's Face the Nation. But after being pressed on a video that backed up the accounts provided to the court, she changed course. Protesters were to blame for the use of force, she said, adding that federal officers only use those chemical agents when there's violence happening and perpetuating. The ruling on Friday by Judge Kate M. Menendez of the Federal District Court in Minnesota said that chemical agents had been used against protesters on at least 4 separate occasions and called the evidence of their use uncontroverted. Federal agents used chemical irritants to punish protesters for exercising protected First Amendment rights to assemble and to observe and protest ICE operations, the judge wrote in issuing her injunction, referring to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. In response to an inquiry about Ms. Noem's comments, Tricia McLaughlin, a Homeland Security spokeswoman, did not comment on Ms. Noem's initial denial and backtracking of immigration agents' use of force. Instead, she emphasized that assaulting and obstructing law enforcement is a felony, and accused protesters of tampering with agents' vehicles and attacking officers with fireworks and automobiles. Judge Menendez had dismissed the government's claims that all use of pepper spray and other chemical irritants had happened after agents were attacked, finding that protected conduct, including protesting and observing the operations, had motivated the agents' adverse actions. The injunction issued last week stemmed from a lawsuit filed by activists who have protested the crackdown or observed the department's operations in Minnesota. The suit was filed in December, before an immigration agent shot and killed an unarmed U.S. citizen, Renee Good, in Minneapolis on January 7th, prompting increased protests against the crackdown. Ms. Good, 37, had partially blocked a roadway where agents were working and did not follow commands to get out of her SUV as she began to drive away. An agent near the front of her car opened fire. In addition to barring agents from using crowd dispersal tools in retaliation for protected speech, Judge Menendez also said agents could not stop or detain protesters in vehicles who were not forcibly obstructing or interfering with agents. On Sunday, Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, defended the Justice Department's decision to not investigate the agent who fatally shot Ms. Good, saying that doing so would be bowing to pressure from the media and politicians. We investigate when it's appropriate to investigate, and that is not the case here, Mr. Blanche said on Fox News Sunday. We don't just go out and investigate every time an officer is forced to defend himself against somebody. The Justice Department has instead pushed to investigate Ms. Good's widow, prompting several federal prosecutors in the state to resign. Ms. Noem said during the interview that her department was conducting a separate internal review of the agent's actions, following the exact same investigative and review process that existed for years. Even as critics of the government's tactics say the operations, particularly in Minnesota, have indiscriminately swept up individuals based on racial and ethnic profiling, President Trump and members of his administration have insisted they are aimed at violent criminals. Department of Homeland Security officials have repeatedly said that 70% of those detained in the administration's immigration crackdown have been charged or convicted of a crime. That figure is roughly in line with a New York Times analysis of immigration arrests between the start of Mr. Trump's term and October 15th, which found that 67% of those taken into custody had been at least charged with a crime of some kind. But Ms. Noem on Sunday went a step further. Every single individual arrested by immigration agents had broken the law, she told Face the Nation, adding that 70% of those detained had either committed or been charged with violent crimes specifically. Ms. McLaughlin, the department spokeswoman, did not respond directly to an inquiry about that statement, but repeated the department's position that 70% of those arrested had been convicted or at least charged with a crime of some kind.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into our next reporting by the New York Times. This is going to be our second to last reporting. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, please like, comment, share, subscribe, as well as enjoy. For more legal breaking news that you need to know about and more on the side of politics. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's turn it over to the New York Times, ladies and gentlemen.
$1 billion in cash buys a permanent seat on Trump's Board of Peace. This article is by Isabel Kirch. Islamic scholars post Sept. 11 convictions are tossed on free speech grounds. This article is by Adil Hassan and read by an automated voice. An Islamic scholar in Virginia who was sentenced to life in prison in 2005 for encouraging his followers to join an overseas militant group to train to fight against the United States has had all of his convictions thrown out. A federal appeals court this month ruled that his statements, no matter how disturbing, were protected by the First Amendment. The scholar, Ali al-Tamimi, was convicted 2 decades ago on 10 criminal charges, including soliciting treason. But on January 9th, a 3-judge panel of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, Virginia, tossed out all of his remaining criminal convictions. Plenty of speech encouraging criminal activity is protected under the First Amendment, Judge James Wynn wrote in the unanimous opinion. The First Amendment's protection does not depend on the popularity or palatability of the message conveyed. On the contrary, it is most vital when speech offends, disturbs, or challenges prevailing sensibilities. Mr. Tamimi, who was known internationally for his lectures on Islamic topics, had advised a group of Washington-area Muslim men who identified him as their spiritual leader to travel to Pakistan. There, he said, they could join a militant group to get military training and potentially fight American troops in Afghanistan. Some of the men bought weapons and received training, although none ever fought in Afghanistan. They became known as the paintball terrorists because they had used paintball games in Virginia as part of their training, prosecutors said in 2005. Some were convicted on various charges and served lengthy prison terms. Mr. Tamimi's defense team argued that he had simply counseled his followers to take their families abroad after September 11th to protect them against an anti-Muslim backlash. Mr. Tamimi and his lawyers have been challenging his conviction for 20 years. One of his longtime lawyers, Jonathan Turley, a legal scholar and law professor at George Washington University, said the case stands as one of the longest direct appeals in history. After the trial in 2005, Judge Leonie M. Brinkema of the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia called the life term, mandated by federal sentencing guidelines, draconian. She granted Mr. Tamimi a conditional release from a supermax prison in Colorado in September 2020, when Mr. Turley drove him across the country to Northern Virginia, where Mr. Tamimi has lived without incident and under court supervision. In July 2024, Judge Brinkema, who was appointed by President Bill Clinton, voided 3 of Mr. Tamimi's 10 convictions because of new rulings from the U.S. Supreme Court, leaving 7 other convictions on appeal. Much to our frustration, Mr. Tamimi has been routinely mislabeled as a terrorism defendant, Thomas M. Huff, his lawyer, said. Although the underlying issues of his case were of course sensitive and complex, they did not involve any terrorism charges whatsoever, a point Judge Brinkema made explicit in her 2020 opinion ordering his release pending appeal. During oral arguments 3 months ago, 2 of the judges hearing the appeal used President Trump's speech, delivered to his supporters just before they attacked the Capitol on January 6, 2021, as a point as they tried to clarify the distinction between First Amendment protected speech and the punishable act of aiding and abetting a crime. What if a large group of people, angry at Congress, gathered on the Washington Mall, some of whom have firearms and are known to have firearms, and a leader stood in front of them here, right in front of them, not in another country, and said, "Go down the street and fight like hell. I'll be there with you," Judge Stephanie Thacker said. So, if what you're advocating is a crime, then what I just said is a crime, may be a crime, she said. In their decision this month, the judges did not comment on Mr. Tamimi's other arguments for acquittal, including that the government lacked sufficient evidence for his convictions. Judge Pamela Harris and Judge Thacker joined Judge Wynn's ruling. All 3 judges were appointed by President Barack Obama. A press officer for the United States Attorney's Office in Alexandria could not immediately be reached for comment. Prosecutors could ask the full appeals court to consider the case or seek a Supreme Court review. Mr. Tamimi, now 62, was born in Washington, the child of Iraqi immigrants. He received bachelor's degrees in biology and computer science, and later, a PhD in computational biology, used in gene sequencing, from George Mason University. Mr. Tamimi, whose father died in 2010 while he was still in prison, has lived in the home of his mother and brother while on conditional release. Another of his lawyers, Jeremy Commons, a federal public defender, said on Sunday that he was relieved and gratified by this decision. When courts refuse to allow convictions based merely on the expression of ideas, no matter how alarming those ideas may be to some, he said, they vindicate the First Amendment's core promise and demonstrate the strength of our system of government.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for this legal breaking reporting video analysis update. If you did enjoy this legal breaking reporting video analysis update, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and enjoy for more legal breaking news that you didn't know about, and more. And I will see you guys in the next legal breaking reporting video analysis update.